Okay, we're going to move on to the housing element update. Our apologies for you have to waiting for us, our presenter.
Not a problem. Good afternoon, Chair and members of the Traffic and Mobility Commission. I did want to provide you with an informational item only on the housing element. We're not requesting any direction from the Traffic and Mobility Commission, just simply providing you with an update on the project. I'll go ahead and share the screen here, which is the presentation on the item. And there we go. So first of all, this is a project, a fairly significant one that the city is pursuing and has pursued for all of this year. The housing plan, as formerly known as the general plan housing element, is our strategy for how we intend to tackle housing issues in the city of Carlsbad. Right now, we're in the housing element cycle that began actually back in 2013 and will expire next year. We are planning now for the next cycle that begins in 2021, where the current one leaves off, and will go through almost the rest of the decade through April of 2029. One of the things this housing plan does is cover housing for all income levels, and that's income levels from very low income all the way up to above moderate income. We do the housing plan because it's a state mandate. The state is very interested, as you probably know, in solving the statewide housing crisis, and it puts a lot of the expectation to do that on local governments, both county and cities. So two purposes of the housing element, and this comes straight from state housing law. And the first is to provide an assessment of what our current and future needs are and identify the constraints in meeting those assessments. And to kind of expand on this first purpose here, you'll see that the housing element is both a data document and a policy document. In order to do this assessment, there's a lot of information on demographics, on costs of land, which you might imagine is a constraint to affordable housing in this city. And to develop this assessment and all the detail that goes into it, and to understand the needs, the housing element is very much a public document. It's not just something that we hire a consultant to tell us what's best. Instead, we have to go out into the community. It's part of the purpose of coming to you and to the other commissions to advise you of this project. It's also part of the purpose why we have a housing element advisory committee to help advise us along the way. So a second purpose of this element is based on that assessment, identifying the constraints, the opportunities. What's a strategy that we can establish? And that strategy is just a series of goals and policies, programs that lays out what we're going to do over the next several years to tackle Carlsbad's housing needs. So as I mentioned, housing plan, formerly known as the housing element, part of the general plan. It's a required mandated element, just like mobility, public safety are. The difference of the housing element as compared to other elements is that it has to be updated on a regular basis, and typically that's every 8 years. As I mentioned, a data and policy document, public input is key. Another unique aspect of the housing element is we have to submit it to the state for approval, and we do that at 2 steps. We'll submit the draft version later this year, and we'll submit the final version that was adopted by the City Council next year. So lots of eyes on this project, both from the state standpoint and also from the community. A major component that we deal with the housing element update, and something that might interest the Traffic and Mobility Commission in particular, is this idea of a regional housing needs assessment, also known as RHNA. It's simply the growth forecast. The state produces a number of housing elements for each region of California, including San Diego County. The San Diego Association of Governments takes that number from the state, develops a local formula, and then distributes that number to all cities and counties. So Encinitas has an allotment, Escondido does, and Carlsbad does. And this RHNA is just simply the state's official forecast of housing needed to accommodate growth through 2029. And it does that by expressing a number of housing units, by breaking up those numbers into income categories, and also equating income with density. As we'll see in a little bit, the state sees density as a proxy for affordability. And again, as you've heard before, this is all required by state law. We have to provide land and opportunities for growth. We have to be able to accommodate these growth projections, state law requirement. And as an aside, there are a number of pros and cons with adopting a housing element. If we don't, we subject ourselves to more scrutiny, more lawsuits. If we are sued, potentially we lose our ability for local land use control. On the plus side, if we have an adopted housing element, we become eligible for grants. So back to the growth forecast. Here's Carlsbad's regional housing needs, or RHNA share. It's just under 4,000 units. And those units have been broken down into these income categories. The lower income category is actually a combination of very low and low. And of those nearly 4,000 units, more than half are in this category. And typically, the type of construction for these units is high density. So for Carlsbad, that more than likely is apartments at greater than 20 units per acre, 20 homes per acre. We also have the moderate income category, almost 750 units here. We satisfy this need by showing we have land at moderate densities, roughly in the range of 10 to 20 units per acre. We've also got the final category of moderate plus or above moderate, just over 1,000 units. We can show that we satisfy this need through our low density housing. And if you're familiar with Carlsbad, you know that the majority of the city is composed of single family neighborhoods, and that's typical of low density or moderate plus income housing. This next chart provides some good news and also gives you the final RHNA number that we have to plan for. So far, what we've been talking about in this first row here is what we'll call the RHNA gross number. And it once again just repeats those numbers for the lower, the moderate, and the moderate plus category. The city, as you know, already has a land use plan that's put out in our land use element of our general plan, and it already designates a whole bunch of land in Carlsbad for residential purposes. So we can already deduct, based on our existing residential land inventory, from this RHNA gross number. We can also subtract planned projects that are now underway, that have been approved, and that are pending that we expect will develop in the next several years. We can also subtract an estimate in terms of the numbers of accessory dwelling units, granny flats or mother-in-law quarters that we expect to be built over the next several years. When we subtract all of that out from our RHNA number, we're left with this RHNA net. And actually that reduces our number by over 3,000. Unfortunately, a lot of that reduction occurs in the moderate income or moderate plus category, meaning we have more units that we need. The state asks cities and counties to provide a buffer, a cushion to that RHNA net number, just in case some sites we're counting don't actually develop, or maybe don't provide the number of units we expect. So the bottom row in this table here is the final number that we have to plan for, and it essentially says City of Carlsbad needs to provide sites at suitable densities to accommodate about 1,600 units. 85% of those are in the lower income category. Those are the toughest sites to develop. We have to find sites at greater than 20 units per acre throughout the city. And as you can imagine, there are a number of constraints that come into play when we do that. So to do that, we have developed 6 different methodologies. These have been taken through our Housing Element Advisory Committee. They've been presented to the community. They've also been shared with the City Council. These 6 methodologies include ideas such as upzoning or increasing the density on certain residential properties. They include counting city-owned properties, such as the parking lot around the shops, as potential residential sites. 2 other methodologies would rezone or redesignate vacant commercial and industrial parcels for residential development. So all of these methodologies have been reviewed by the Housing Element Advisory Committee. Now that's a group that was appointed by City Council late last year. It includes 4 representatives from the Planning Commission, the Housing Commission, Senior Commission, and also your own Brandon Perez from your Traffic and Mobility Commission. It also includes 5 resident representatives, 1 from each of the city's quadrants and 1 at-large representative. These methodologies have been presented to them. That committee has ranked them. That information about the methodologies has also been shared with the community through a public survey in the first 2.5 weeks of August. That input, along with the Housing Element Advisory Committee's input, was shared with the City Council about 2 weeks ago on August 27th. Staff took that information to them to seek their direction. What should we look at in the way of methodologies? Are the 6 we've proposed adequate? Does the City Council have any recommendations either way? We actually didn't get any direction from the council. Instead, they indicated that all methodologies were appropriate. So based on that, our next steps are now to prepare maps that identify sites that would help us solve our remaining RHNA need. Now, these sites might be in industrial locations. They could be in other parts of the city, such as our downtown, such as around our mall. These maps that we'll develop will be presented to the community for further input. So that kind of leads us to this next to last slide here, which is just our timeline for the project. And this relays to how you might be involved as a Traffic and Mobility Commission. We're right in the midst of public engagement of developing these maps to share with the community. We are beginning our environmental scoping of the sites we've identified that will look at a variety of topics, habitat issues, and of course issues such as level of service and vehicle miles traveled. All of that will be considered. We will produce both a draft housing element and a draft environmental document for public review by the end of this year. And ultimately that information will be presented to the public through hearings early next year, and ultimately to the City Council for hopefully its adoption of our housing element by April of next year. April of next year is actually the state's deadline. That deadline has been in place for quite some time. Despite COVID and despite efforts from organizations such as the League of California Cities, the state has not extended that deadline. So it's very aggressive, of course, between now and then to put out all of this information and hopefully get an adopted document. If you want more information on this project, our website has a lot of bulletins, of videos, of information on the Housing Element Advisory Committee that you're more than welcome, of course, to seek and find. And you don't even have to remember the specific website address. If you just go to the city's homepage and type in housing plan, that will get you to the information regarding this project. And so with that, I will conclude my presentation. Thank you for your time, and we'll certainly welcome any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Donald. If you stop sharing, there you go. I can see everybody. Do we have any comments or questions? No. Okay, I did see 2 after I said no. Okay, I'm going to start with Vice Chair Perez.
I just wanted to thank Mr. Donald for his time and the presentation, and also thank you for the VMT and the LOS plugs. As you probably, Mr. Donald knows, I'm pretty adamant about talking about that during the committee meeting. So thank you.
Commissioner Linke.
Also, thank you for the presentation, and I had the same comments that Commissioner Perez just mentioned about making sure that we're looking at VMT and LOS. There are a couple of projects. I know one of them was changed from commercial to residential, which would help, but it was in an area where there's no other commercial. So people who could have traveled to that location for their job closer by can't travel there. And then all these new apartments that are there, they're going to have to travel a long distance. And there was an industrial site too that's being developed, but there aren't any grocery stores or other shopping around it. So I know you're keeping that stuff in mind, but it's just a concern that it's nice to be able to convert an unused industrial or commercial area, but if you're going to force people to travel 20 miles to get to the grocery store, you're not helping traffic. That's obviously our focus here. But thank you for the good presentation and all of your work on this.
Okay, any other comments? No? Okay. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Donald.
You're welcome.